This is the Read, Write, and Create podcast, the award-winning podcast where you get a bite-sized session of creative writing coaching from me, Lori L. Tharps. I'm a journalist and a former tenured college professor who moved to the south of Spain so I could live a global literary life. I'm also an award-winning author of both fiction and nonfiction who believes in the transformative power of a story well told. I created this podcast because I want to help as many BIPOC writers as possible get their stories out of their heads and into the world. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, wordsmiths, storytellers, and scribes. Welcome back to our special Behind the Book season of the Read, Write, and Create podcast. This season, we're talking to real people and reviewing the lives of our literary ancestors whose livelihood and life missions require or required the free circulation of books in society. On our last episode, we spoke to Sylvia Arthur, who used her own personal book collection to create the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora in Accra, Ghana in 2017. Today, we're going back in time to learn about a man named David Ruggles, who used his own personal collection of books and printed materials to create the very first Black-owned bookstore in the United States. David Ruggles was a revolutionary thinker, a bibliophile, a healer, and a radical abolitionist who believed that reading and the written word would set his people free. When you hear his full story, I guarantee it will leave you lit. So let's get to it. Once upon a time, there was a young boy named David Ruggles, who was born in Norwich, Connecticut in 1810. He was the oldest of 8 children born to free Black parents. His father was David Sr., that is, who was a blacksmith, and his mother, Nancy, was a well-known caterer in the community. The Ruggles family attended the local Methodist church in Norwich, and they apparently were part of an active free Black community where the people there were mostly descendants of freed slaves. What is known about the early days of David Ruggles' life in Norwich is that he was pretty happy ensconced in this community. He loved his family, and the family was not to say well off, but the fact that all of the children in the family survived childhood suggests that they had enough financial comfort to enjoy their lives. And young David, again, he apparently was happy there in Connecticut, and he enjoyed his schooling very much. When he finished school at age 17, David was ready to go out into the world and see what he could make of himself, and he landed in New York City, where research suggests that he worked for a little while as a mariner before he got work in the grocery business. Because I love to share with you the behind the scenes of the research, I actually saw that he was a butter merchant, which I suppose meant that for a while he was selling butter. But the point is that he was in the grocery business and apparently was very good at it. So much so that by the time he turned 18, young David opened his first grocery store there in New York City. By the time he was in his early 20s, though, he still had that grocery store, but he had become very active in the growing abolitionist movement in New York. He actually became like a traveling salesman for the Emancipator newspaper. The Emancipator was a newspaper by the name alone. You should get that it was a newspaper for abolitionists. And he would go, when we say a traveling salesman, he would basically be put on like a speaker circuit where he would speak about the horrors of slavery, the importance of abolition, and then get people to subscribe to the newspaper to help their funding. And again, he became very good at this. People really said he was an amazing speaker. And he wasn't just about talking about abolition as a theory, which many abolitionists were. You know, they would like theorize that it was wrong in the eyes of God to keep people enslaved. But David Ruggles was about really getting people unchained and free now. According to the David Ruggles Center website, and yes, there is a website, it said that he believed, quote, that abolitionists should not just philosophize about the day slavery would end, but strive to help all victims of human bondage. He also advocated the use of civil disobedience and self-defense, unquote. In fact, many abolitionists thought David Ruggles was too radical because he openly would confront slave owners and slave catchers and would not back down. And at this time in New York history, if you're not aware, this is when the fugitive slave laws allowed people to come up north and just grab their quote unquote runaway slaves and take them back south. But they weren't just taking back their slaves. They would basically pick up any black man. Remember Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave? They would pick up any black man and take them back down south. They would just kidnap black people left and right. And David Ruggles was like, not on my watch. And he would get in people's face on the street and stop them and really cause a ruckus, cause a scene. And some people thought that was not the way to go. But David Ruggles was like, we cannot watch people get kidnapped. Anyway, he was at the forefront of the abolitionist movement and was really, really ready to go to battle for any black person trying to escape slavery. His house was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And he never tried to hide his activities or beliefs. Even though the Underground Railroad was supposedly underground, David Ruggles was telling everybody basically that slavery was wrong and we needed to do stuff about it now. So how does this come into his bookstore? Like, where do the books come in? I'm glad you asked. So apparently, David Ruggles, again, remember, he had a nice childhood. He was well educated back in Connecticut. So he was definitely an intellectual. So he understood the power of reading and the written word and using books and pamphlets to disseminate information. So initially, remember, David has his own grocery store, but that grocery store served multiple purposes, including acting as a lending library and a reading room for Black people, since guess where they weren't allowed to go? In New York's public libraries. So David was like, I'm going to allow people to come in here and read materials. And he was really adamant that Black people needed to be able to not just, have books to read for fun, but to stay abreast of what was happening in the abolitionist movement. So he kept a lot of anti-slavery and abolitionist books and literature at this reading room so people could come and read there. Not surprisingly, that store was burned down. So what did he do? David would not be deterred. He reopened D. Ruggles Books. Yep, say the name with me, people. D. Ruggles Books in 1834. And this is considered the first Black-owned bookstore in the United States. That store was at 67 Lispenard Street in Lower Manhattan, near Canal Street and Broadway. In the store, Ruggles sold anti-slavery publications, both books and pamphlets. I also read that he sold feminist literature as well. And just like in his grocery store, there was a reading room and you had a subscription fee to read in order to participate. It was not a large fee, but that's how he supported his activities. Also, Ruggles himself was a printer and he printed a lot of his own pamphlets. And remember, pamphlets were, I would say they're probably like a magazine today, but, not quite a book, but you could write a pamphlet on a topic of the day and disseminate those as well. Now, there was a really great biographical article written in the Journal of Negro History in 1943 about Ruggles, and this is what they said about his bookstore. Quote, one of the most important services of his reading room was to place the principal daily and leading anti-slavery papers, tracts, and pamphlets, and other periodicals of the day within the reach of the Negro public. Unquote. Now, remember, there was an annual fee to take part in this reading room, but he never made people who were escaping slavery, who probably didn't have that kind of money, which again, this wasn't a large fee, but he was always very clear that Black people, especially who were on their route to freedom, could stop in and read in his bookstore. So there's a new book out that I just got. I'm in love with. You'll probably hear me talking about it all the time. It's called Prose to the People, and it's about the history of Black bookstores in the United States. And this is what they had to say about D. Ruggles Books. They said, quote, D. Ruggles Books inaugurated Black book vendors as epicenters of Black freedom. Unsurprisingly, Ruggles' store on Lippensard Street bustled with the sale of anti-slavery publications, some of which he penned and printed in his own print shop. So indeed, he was not just, again, selling other people's books. He was printing his own pamphlets and tracts as well, his own anti-slavery publications. And he published the first official literary journal published by an African American. There is a biography written about David Ruggles by a man named Graham Russell Gow Hodges. And this is what he wrote about the D. Ruggles Bookstore. Quote, "His bookstore was much more than a literary space. These books were providing knowledge to support and strengthen the abolitionist movement." So it kind of makes me think about how our barbershops and beauty salons are also this hotbed of activism. And that's what this very first Black-owned bookstore was as well. D. Ruggles Books, everybody knew D. Ruggles as an abolitionist, and they knew that books that he kept in his bookstore were going to also be where one could find information about freedom. Now, I love this, that there's an ad that was found from 1834 that was actually written by D. Ruggles himself, advertising his bookstore. And this is what the ad says. And it's lovely because it's literally, a little print from a newspaper from the time. And this is how he described his own bookstore. The ad says, "Anti-slavery bookstore, 67 Lispenard Street, near Broadway. The subscriber offers for sale at the above establishment anti-slavery publications of every description, wholesale and retail, also school books and stationery. All orders will be thankfully received and punctually attended to. Signed, D. Ruggles, May 26th, 1834. I love that. And again, it's so amazing to see this as an ad. And I know living in Europe, 1834, that's not really old history, but for the US, and again, for having our first Black-owned bookstore that we can still see what an ad for that bookstore looks like, it's amazing. Also at his bookstore, because D. Ruggles was enterprising, he also offered services for bookbinding, letterpress, and picture framing. All right, D. Ruggles, I see you. So David Ruggles understood the power of the written word. This is again from the article from 1943. It says, quote, "Ruggles was one of the best and earliest Negro authors. His successful journalistic effort to bring to the general public information which could only reach occasional audiences through the spoken word is represented in the 3 issues of the Mirror of Liberty, which he edited and published." And in fact, that publication, that's what I was saying, the first journal edited by an African American, the Mirror of Liberty, that was D. Ruggles who published it. And again, he printed it right there in his store because he's an enterprising man. I love this. David Ruggles was like on a mission. He would not be stopped. He also published The Abrogation of the Seventh Commandment, and it was an appeal to Northern white women to confront their husbands who kept enslaved Black women as mistresses. He was not going to stop. He was like, that is wrong. And white women, you need to do something and get your men to stop basically raping Black women. So he was like, let me put that down in paper. Let me put that in print. This is why I love talking about these behind the book stories. Even though David himself was printing his own materials, he knew, like, as a speaker, remember he started out going on speaking engagements. There was only so much you could do. I mean, he could only speak in so many places, but if he wrote the stuff down, then it could be disseminated everywhere. And that's why I'm like harping on this idea of we have to get our stories out into the world. We have to get them published because that's how they get disseminated. A book, an article can be disseminated hundreds of miles over oceans. So keep writing, people. All right. So David Ruggles was inspired by his abolitionist work. And that's what the printing that he did, that's the books that he was selling at his bookstore. But again, he also had children's books. He also had school books in there. So he understood just in general how powerful the written word was. Now, his inspiration was abolition. More than anything else in the world, David Ruggles wanted to see Black people be free. He wanted to see the ending of slavery in the United States. And New York State had abolished slavery, but that didn't mean that Black people were free. There were so many quote unquote slave catchers coming and just snatching people off the streets that David was one of the founders of something called the New York Committee of Vigilance, which fought against the practice of kidnapping free Black people. So they kept watch and would provide legal services and advocate for any African Americans who were snatched illegally and taken back down south. Records show that David Ruggles helped at least 600 enslaved Africans fleeing from slavery, whether that was through the Vigilance Committee or because his house, like I said, was on the Underground Railroad. One of the most famous people he helped escape slavery was none other than the Frederick Douglass. Yes, when Frederick Douglass encountered David Ruggles, he himself had just escaped from Maryland and was directed to David Ruggles' house at 67 Lisbernard Street. Famous spot, right? At that point, Frederick Douglass was still Frederick Bailey, and he was lost. He had no idea what he was supposed to do with himself. And it was David Ruggles who helped him change his name, helped him find work, and sent him along to Massachusetts. And even it was in David Ruggles' house at Lisbernard Street where Frederick Douglass married his wife, Anna Murray. There was a minister there who married them. David Ruggles was one of the witnesses. So it's incredible how much impact David Ruggles had. And that's not even the end of it all. So Frederick Douglass described David Ruggles as, quote, a whole-souled man fully imbued with a love of his afflicted and hunted people, unquote. So David Ruggles is speaking truth to power. He's helping runaways. He's printing journals and tracts. He's running the first Black-owned bookstore. My man, my man. Sounds like the life, but it actually wasn't a great life at all. It was a dangerous life. It was a very hard life. And the Black man that bold does not go unnoticed or unpunished. Sadly, only 1 year after David opened D. Ruggles Books, the bookstore and all of its inventory was burned to the ground in an act of arson. Of course, nobody was ever tried with the crime. That was in 1835. In 1837, David Ruggles was thrown in jail for almost 2 years while he awaited trial for the crime of, can you guess, giving shelter to a Black person who was trying to escape slavery. Yup, that's what he was in jail for almost 2 years. By this point, according to the Ruggles website, David Ruggles is, quote, one of the most hated abolitionists in New York, unquote. Again, remember how young this poor man is. In 1837, he's only 27 years old. He's been beaten, assaulted, threatened, the victim of arson more than once, and he was almost kidnapped himself by slave catchers. At this point, he's literally almost completely blind and in very bad health. And due to legal troubles and infighting at the vigilance community, he's nearly destitute. Think about that. He had been at the pinnacle of the abolitionist movement and has been reduced to this frail, nearly destitute man. But his life isn't over. In 1842, David Ruggles leaves New York and moves to Northampton, Massachusetts, which is in Western Massachusetts. And he joins a utopian community that was formed by abolitionists there. Now, fun fact, I went to college in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I never knew about this history, which makes me think I've got to go back and look into it. But there was a utopian community founded by white and Black abolitionists called the Northampton Association of Education and Industry. And thankfully, that kind community of people took David Ruggles in and allowed him to do what he needed to do, which more than anything, it was time to rest and to recover. Here's the part where it's like reinvention time. Love this. Apparently, there was something called the water cure or hydrotherapy that was really popular at the time. And David Ruggles had heard about it, so he tried doing it on himself. I'm sorry, I try to figure out what water therapy is, hydrotherapy. I don't get it. It's like drinking a lot of water, bathing in water. Don't quote me on anything, but it was a big thing at the time. The water cure, hydrotherapy. Point being, David Ruggles was so impressed by this concept that he tried to do the water cure on himself. And apparently he didn't regain all of his eyesight, but he did get to the point where he could note movement and restored some of his eyesight. But overall, his health greatly improved by this hydrotherapy. He was so excited about this. And again, he didn't really have any money, but he was such a persuasive man and people had seen the improvement in his own health. They lent him the money and he built a hydrotherapy center. And this was in, it wasn't called Florence, Massachusetts at the time. It's called Florence today. So we're just going to call it Florence. But he built a hydrotherapy center where people could come and get the water cure from him. And he practiced it himself. Like he was doing hydrotherapy on other people. And this actually was the first building in the nation dedicated exclusively to hydrotherapy. So he goes from opening the first Black bookstore to opening the first hydrotherapy center. Now, get this. This man was not a medical practitioner. He never got to medical school, but he taught himself hydrotherapy. And again, he was nearly blind, but he could literally feel where people's problems were and would help them with hydrotherapy. Now, that sounds crazy, right? And remember, he's living in a utopian society. You might think, this is just nuts, but it worked. And soon doctors were sending their patients to David Ruggles to cure them with hydrotherapy. And according to that 1943 article, doctors, lawyers, clergymen, mechanics from every part of the country, including foreign countries, were coming to get cured by David Ruggles. The newspapers were literally advertising his work as Dr. Ruggles' water cure establishment. Mind you, he's not a doctor, okay? He's not a doctor. He left school at 17, but it doesn't matter. Like, people said that he could, again, even blind, he could feel where people's problem parts were. He could intuit, his senses, and that does really happen. His senses were enhanced when he went blind. Regardless, he ended his life as a well-known hydrotherapist. Some of the people, his famous patients, included William Lloyd Garrison, Catherine Beecher, and none other than Sojourner Truth. Yes, and Sojourner Truth actually was part of that utopian society also, so they were hobnobbing around together. Sadly, David Ruggles' renewed health did not last for very long. By the time he was 39 years old in 1849, he fell ill. Now, many of the reports that I saw said that his illness was due to being beaten so many times, being put in jail, that the stress of being an abolitionist, and not just any abolitionist, but an active abolitionist who literally put his life on the line over and over again, took on beatings and other physical abuse to save other people. So apparently he had a bowel infection, and that's what killed him. And he was only 39 years old. He died on December 16th in Massachusetts, but his body was returned and buried in his hometown of Norwich, Connecticut. This is the epigraph I would like to give David Ruggles, and this is from Prose to the People, the book. It says, quote, David Ruggles envisioned a free society and believed books could break slavery's chains. As the father of stateside Black bookstores, Ruggles served as a lighthouse for later booksellers seeking freedom through literacy. D. Ruggles Books marks the genesis of the storied history of Black bookstores in the United States and their key role as sites for Black liberation. Unquote. Thank you, David Ruggles, for everything you did for Black people and Black bookstores in the United States. Thank you for listening to the Read, Write, and Create podcast. I hope somebody listening right now is more inspired than ever to write their book and get it out into the world. Might that somebody be you? Yeah, you. I'm talking to you. When you think about people like David Ruggles, who literally gave his life for others to be free and understood that the written word, books, and pamphlets were the best way to spread a message of freedom far and wide, I hope that makes you think, I gotta get back to my writing. When you hear about people like David Ruggles, who created a space for oppressed people to come and read and learn and have intellectual discussions about the issues of the day, and that those spaces were considered so dangerous to the oppressors that they had to burn them down to the ground, then I hope you feel even more motivated to put pen to paper and hit publish. Our words are so powerful, people. We can educate, motivate, inspire, and teach people what's possible with our stories. We can undo the erasure and false narratives that have been told about who we are, where we came from, and what we're capable of. David Ruggles knew this. He knew this and continued to put his words down on paper and hit publish over and over and over again until he went blind with the effort. Must you grind yourself to dust and give up your life for the cause? No. Just keep writing, my friends. Keep writing and keep sharing your stories. That's the assignment. All right. I hope you feel motivated and ready to write, people. If you're looking for more creative writing inspiration and useful resources for your literary life, then be sure to check out the Read, Write, and Create website at readwriteandcreate.com. While you're there, you can sign up for the Read, Write, and Create newsletter, which is the first place where you'll find out about my latest classes and creative offerings, as well as cool things to optimize and enjoy your literary lifestyle. I'll leave the link for the website and the newsletter in the show notes. And by the way, if you look at the website, we will have information about this episode and David Ruggles and where you can find more information about him. We'll have a link to the biography and the David Ruggles website. Now, if you are not following Read, Write, and Create on Instagram, you should be. We post lots of literary inspiration and useful links to upcoming opportunities, contests, and prizes. That's at Read, Write, and Create. That's CRE8. And while you're following things, if you're interested in following my global literary lifestyle, check out my new YouTube channel at Literary Lori. Again, the link will be in the show notes. The Read, Write, and Create podcast is written and produced by me, Lori L. Tharps. Our editor is Brad Linder, and our theme music is by Wataboy. Until next week, scribes, keep writing. The world needs more BIPOC stories written by BIPOC storytellers just like you.